Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next installment of the Leo Beck Institute Book Club, where today we are going to discuss A German Jew's Triumph, Fritz Oppenheimer, and the Denazification of Germany. And we're going to be talking about it a little bit with the author of the book, Cindy Schweich Handler, and with her husband, Harry Handler. And this Fritz Oppenheimer is Harry's grandfather. So I wanted to thank them both for being here. I am Michael Simonson. We meet once every month to every few months online to discuss a book related to the topic of German speaking Jewish history. I'm going to introduce our two guests today. First, I'm going to introduce the author, Cindy Schweich Handler. Cindy Schweich Handler is the author of A German Jew's Triumph, Fritz Oppenheimer, and the Denazification of Germany. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, AARP, the magazine, Newsweek, and numerous other national publications. She is a former editor of local magazines for the USA Today network and has contributed regularly to The Record and NorthJersey.com. Along with her husband, she has shared her book subject story at the National World War I Museum in Kansas City, the 2026 Biographers International Conference, and other groups as well. And second, I introduce you to Harry Handler. Harry Handler is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison History Department with degrees in history and political science. He lectures on World War I and II and contributed to the foreword and epilogue to this book. He serves on the History Department Board of Visitors at his alma mater. After moving to New York City post-graduation, his first job was to ghostwrite a history book for the 300th anniversary of his trading firm. Though he has worked in finance for many years, his first love is history. And he is currently working on a book about the storied art curator Max Friedlander and the choices required to stay true to oneself during a time of reckoning. So I welcome you both, and I am going to hand the conversation over to Cindy to begin our discussion. She's just going to say a few words, and then we'll begin the actual presentation with Harry. So
Thanks.
go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, thanks, Michael. I just want to thank everybody for coming today and for sharing the story with us. We're always thrilled to do that. I want to give a special thanks to Michael Simonson because he was the first person I spoke to when getting information on this book. And I think the subject was to get a sense of what German Jewish culture was like at the turn of the century. And Michael did this even though it was very early on in COVID. There was no vaccine at the time, and he had COVID, but he spoke to us anyway on Zoom. So, so thanks to Michael. And I always say I came to this story after my mother-in-law died, and we had all these journals and documents that we hadn't opened before. And when we did so, we were amazed with what we had inherited. And Harry took these documents to a professor at University of Wisconsin, where he has a lot of ties, and said, you've written a lot of books. Would you like to write this one? And he said, well, it's really your story. I think you should write it. And then because I'm a journalist, Harry took everything to me and said, because you're a journalist, I think you should write it. And that's how we came to produce this book. And it was such a pleasure to research and write. But it's really Harry's family's story. So I am going to hand it over to him because he does a great job with sharing it. So Harry, I hand the floor to you.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you very much, and thank you to Michael and Leo Beck, who's been a tremendous help as we've done this, worked on this story. Let's say I grew up in the Midwest, very American. I knew that my mother was German only because she spoke German to her parents. Otherwise, she had no accent, and I really grew up with the traditional, American upbringing, Friday night football, bluegrass music. Went to the University of Wisconsin. Did move to New York and spent a lot of time taking care of my grandmother, who did have a heavy German, heavy German accent, and used to go to her house at least one day a week. Both my mother and grandparents, they would talk about history. They were very forward-looking, never spoke about the war years. My grandmother passed away in the early 90s, and the grandchildren gathered at the apartment trying to decide what to do with this overstuffed one bedroom on the Upper East Side. The thought was, is let's throw everything away. Just what's in these albums and valises, who cares? We just need to get rid of everything. I said, well, I'm a history major, who just moved to a house in Montclair, New Jersey. Said she has a closet, I have a closet. We'll move this stuff and we'll put it in a closet. Fast forward another 10 years, a child who had to write a paper on the Marshall Plan came to me and said, "Oh, you got to take me to the library. I'm supposed to look for original material on the Marshall Plan." I said, "Well, I did know that your grandfather worked for the State Department. Maybe there's something in what we've stuffed in the closet. Let's open it up and see what we can find." And opened it up, and the very first thing we saw is I looked at it, and my German is very poor, but I said, "Oh my goodness, that's signed by Adolf Hitler." The document on the left. Look at the thing on the right. This is Hitler's last political will and testament signed at 4 in the morning on April 29th, 1945. The day before Hitler commits, and his mistress commit suicide in the bunker. Why do I have these materials sitting in that house? There was an account of the German surrender, and I actually went back and, this was a while ago, but you could look at old newsreels of World War II and the surrender. And I noticed when I looked at this, and this was from the AP, that if you see the small guy walking with the German generals on the surrender day, that's Grandpa. I said, "What's Grandpa doing in this picture?" There's Grandpa walking into the surrender museum, and he's got his briefcase, and I still have that briefcase. That's the briefcase that was used to carry the surrender documents. I was thinking there is a story here, and I want to go back and read this story or figure out this story. And I have to say, my interest in history, I've always loved history, but was on, modern European diplomatic history, really, 18th and 1900s, particularly military history and studying the world wars. So I came at it, from a separate angle. I did read his Fritz Oppenheimer wrote an account of the German surrender, which he sent to the Assistant Secretary of War, who is a friend of his, Jack McCloy. And as part of the account of the surrender, he's interviewing on the plane afterwards Field Marshal Keitel, was in charge of all the German armed forces. And Field Marshal Keitel asks Major, says, "Major, how come you speak German without an accent?" So I said, I've got to go back and understand this story. Went back, dug through the albums, dug through all the journals. University of Wisconsin was a tremendous help in translating things. Turns out my grandfather was one of 5 children in 3 years. So there were two sets of twins, because you think, how do you have 5 children in 3 years? Two sets of twins. They had one son. Next year later, twin boys. Next year, another set of twins, a boy and a girl, and there you can see them all lined up on a bench in Hanover. Interesting thing is they're also wearing their little naval uniforms, which is the way children were dressed in Germany at the time. Able to go back and these movies are fascinating these days. You can look at scenes from Berlin at the turn of the century. The thing that was so interesting to me is that you see people strolling, and you see people strolling in uniform. The way up in German society was to be in the was to be in the military, and you see them wearing their military uniform to the cafe, walking the streets. Also, this was a Jewish family. You didn't realize that, at the time that the best pl place to be Jewish in Europe at the time, turn of the century, was probably Germany. This was the house that my grandfather and mother grew up in Germany. It was very close to the Tiergarten. You can see my great grandmother on the balcony of the second floor. They were a very wealthy family and doing well. Everything was moving along nicely until summer of 1914. Four Serbian nationalists decided to assassinate the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, the heir to the throne. One kind of randomly succeeds, cascading series of events where Austria-Hungary um, puts conditions on Serbia. The Russians mobilized their army, so the Germans mobilized their army but attacked France first, and the world is at war. Looking at amazingly, to look at the films of the time, the thing that really struck me, in addition to the German soldiers marching off to war, is the civilians marching alongside them, doffing their caps. The Germans thought everybody thought it was going to be a short war. It looks like the beginning of a marathon. They have flowers on top of their pickle-hulled helmets. You would see the same thing in France, as with their elan and colorful uniforms, they marched off. The civilians, alongside, waving their flags. People hope it's going to be a quick war and that, one side will win, and then the destiny of Europe is kind of set going forward. Fritz Oppenheimer is too young to go to war when it starts, but at 16, as soon as he can, he volunteers. His very first battle is Verdun. There you can see him on the left. He's trying to grow a mustache. He's only 5'3", probably weighs around, a little over 100 pounds. Got his gas mask on. The very first battle is Verdun. 750,000 casualties, 300,000 dead, and the lines did not move. Fritz fought the entire war. I think he was a good soldier because they had him at the center of most major battles of the entire campaign, and he fought to the bitter end. He was wounded 4 times, gassed. Twice, he was the only person of his unit to survive. When the Fort Douaumont blew up at Verdun, he happened to be on a top floor, so he lived. And at the end of the war, while the Germans were surrendering in mass to the Allies, he was still fighting, and he was awarded his second Iron Cross 7 days before the armistice was signed in 1918. War ends. Germans think that there's been an armistice. But the war has been fought to a draw. The Allies, say that they've won. Terrible time in Germany, but Fritz Oppenheimer is very anxious to get back, and he very quickly goes to law school, becomes a lawyer. At the time, the upper class Jews, they tended to be, up until the generation before, marriages were arranged. There was actually a contract, an exchange of goods when there was a marriage. By this generation, by the 20s, people of the same class were placed in the same location and then expected to choose their mate from, amongst those classes. So they weren't necessarily love marriages. Fritz Oppenheimer, even though this was close, I think it started as certainly started as a love marriage. So the Oppenheimers, who were a very wealthy family from Berlin, he married into an even wealthier family, Elsbeth Kaula from southern Germany. Her father was a Kaula, her mother was a Warburg, so good for connections. And they quickly got married in 1927. within months. There's first Margaret is born in 1928. Ingrid comes along in 1929. I think that just a year apart, so very quickly. And they were still a wealthy family. Raised children were raised by nannies, even though by 1929, Great Depression is happening. Economic times are getting tougher. Not so much for this family, but because they're still living pretty well. But Germany is in chaos. Uh, Elspeth Oppenheimer takes her older daughter, Bombs, down to visit her father in Stuttgart. They're going down for his birthday. Bombs is very tired while visiting another house, wants to go home. They take a car back to their house. Bombs opens the door of the car, runs across the street, is struck by a car, never regains consciousness, and dies 2 hours later. Bombs is buried in Berlin. Elspeth Oppenheimer wrote, "We will never be able to be truly happy ever again." Really just a terrible tragedy. Sure, very difficult on the marriage. Fritz Oppenheimer had sent his wife and what they called his favorite daughter off to Stuttgart. Now she's passed away, and this is at a time when the banks that he works for as a corporate lawyer are collapsing. Germany is just a complete mess. The right-wing parties, and this is under Adolf Hitler had gotten around 2 to 3% of the vote in 1928. By the time the Great Depression is coming, they're doing better. Hitler's campaign slogan is "One people, one empire, one leader. Only I can do it." He has an army of, and you can see these brown shirts marching through the street. These are not part of the army. These are just, unemployed, tend to be thuggish people who've been given uniforms by the Nazi Party. German politics is in chaos. Governments rise, they fall. Hitler insists on being chancellor. Finally, General von Hindenburg says, who's the president, says, "Okay, you can be chancellor." The Nazis only get 3 seats in the government, so the rest of the cabinet ministers think they can control Hitler. A month later, the Reichstag, which is the equivalent of the American Capitol, burns. Very unclear who started the fire. They find some insane Dutch person who had some leftist leanings, muttering, around in the Reichstag. The Nazis immediately declare that there's a communist insurrection happening, like in Russia, and they start arresting the communists and sending them to concentration camps. Also, socialists, as Joseph Goebbels, who's Hitler's propaganda minister, said, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will even come to believe it," which is fascinating. By March 1933, the communists are in jail, so they can't vote in the Reichstag. Socialists are blocked from coming in to vote. The remaining German politicians vote Hitler into power, without being subject to the Reichstag's dictates. It's the Enabling Act, and democracy in Germany is over forever. Hitler has run on a anti-Semitic platform, and immediately Jewish doctors, lawyers, shop owners, they lose their licenses. And I would have thought that our family, because nobody talked about the story, would have been fighting to leave Germany at the time. Anne Frank's family left in 33. Albert Einstein left in 33. My family wasn't fighting to leave. They were fighting to remain in Germany. These are documents we found from the Bundesarchiv, where Fritz Oppenheimer says, "I'm a loyal German. I fought in the Great War, and I'm not a communist." And he's applying for his law license back, and they do give him his law license back. So they stay in Germany, loyal Germans until 19 you get to 1936, where the Nuremberg laws, which really say that he'll no longer be able to practice law, openly in Germany, is put into practice. It had actually been passed earlier, but they waited until after the Olympics to put it in. Here's the Nazi rally in Nuremberg after the Olympics. Just shocking to see, the soldiers goose-stepping together. Everybody's in perfect line. Doesn't seem like there's any individuality. Not sure about how many people. I think 800,000 were there in Nuremberg, and they finally realize the family has to flee. My mother is sent to bed, but told to wear her best clothes. They wake up in the middle of in the night. They pack just with suitcases. The art comes off the wall and goes into my mother's portfolio. They take a train across the border to Holland. I did ask my grandmother, how at one point how the art got to us, and she said border guards were as stupid then as they are today. So that they had no idea that this was valuable art in a 9-year-old's portfolio. And again, this is the fascinating thing. There's my mother, who is exactly the same age as Anne Frank. She's born 2 days later. Really looks like Anne Frank, and the Frank family had left much earlier, so they left late. And then even after they left, Fritz Oppenheimer stayed and practiced law under the guise of an Aryan partner. So he stayed in Berlin. 1938, Hitler and Goebbels have promised that Berlin will be Judenfrei, or Jew-free. His partner, they come to the partner, who lets him know that yes, there's a Jewish lawyer as part of this. He has to leave immediately. He takes a night a night train to Holland. The Gestapo, and there you can see them in their very natty black uniforms, actually manufactured by Hugo Boss at the time. They try to keep that story secret. And they pull him off the train, interrogate him for 5 hours, uh, very much on the border between will he be sent to concentration camp, what will happen to him. But he pulls the Indignant Lawyer Act. They take his passport, and he walks over the border to Holland. At the time, what was going on in the world, and you do wonder because you always look to draw parallels to today. Hitler wanted to go back to war. They'd lost population in the Treaty of Versailles. Uh, he really just wanted to go back to war and refight World War One. But what was the rationale besides refighting it? And his rationale was there are German speakers who are outside the borders of Germany, so naturally we need to expand back again. And it's just interesting to see that the language that Hitler used in 38 is the same that Vladimir Putin used to explain his invasion of Ukraine. Why there needs to be, all the people who speak the same language need to be within the same state kind of escapes me, but this was the rationale. I'll point out I have Russian-speaking relatives who live in New Jersey, and it doesn't mean that they need to be part of Russia, even though perhaps they'll invade here. Were there opportunities to stop Hitler in the 30s? Absolutely. He remilitarized the Rhineland when Germany had 3 divisions. The Allies had much more. They just couldn't believe that they'd have to go to war again. Austria, the Austrians offered to hold a plebiscite to see whether they wanted to be part of Germany. Hitler knew he would lose it, so he invaded, and now Austria was part of the Reich. Next, he turned his objectives to the Sudetenland, which is the German-speaking area around Czechoslovakia. England and France and Italy show up. They negotiate and they say, okay, you can have the Sudetenland. Chamberlain goes back saying there will be peace in our time. But in 1938, the Nazis take Czechoslovakia. And people know that war is coming. They think it's delayed. They think that Hitler never wants a two-front war. So as long as Russia's on the side of the Allies, they will, there won't be a war. But in August 1939, uh, Hitler and Stalin negotiate the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement, and the very next week, Hitler invades Poland. So it was just about going back to war. Where World War One, the Germans were looking to expand German culture. This was a war, World War Two was a war of annihilation. As Hitler told his troops before they invaded Poland, our strength is in our quickness and our brutality. Where World War One was very static, defense was better than offense. World War Two, with the Luftwaffe, with air wars, tanks that move very fast, it was not a static war. Poland fought bravely, sometimes cavalry troops attacking tanks, but they were driven back in a few weeks. The officer corps and intelligentsia fled to the Russian side. The Russians double-crossed them, came into the from the eastern side of Poland, took the leaders of Polish society and the officer corps captive, and in the next month slaughtered them all. They're buried in Keitel Forest. The war in the West, little happened, for a number of months, and then in May 1940, Germany attacked first Holland and Belgium, and then France. France, which had fought for 4 years and really won with the British in World War One, fell within 5 weeks. Everybody was shocked that France had fallen so quickly. And even England at the time, and this was a shock to me, they interned their refugees. So Germans, Italian, even immigrants, these are people who'd been fleeing the fascists and fled to England. The British started interning them. So it was time, Fritz Oppenheimer decided this is time to move on too. He applied for papers to get into the United States. And I will point out at this time that the US State Department was turning down 95 to perhaps 99% of the applications for Jewish refugees to come into the United States. Fritz Oppenheimer had a connection with the American Chamber of Commerce. Their paperwork is quickly approved. They go to the family. Again, this is my grandmother and her brother and mother go to a ship that sails out of Liverpool. They're in a convoy. As soon as the air cover for the convoy goes back, they're attacked by German U-boats. They're up on the deck in the lifeboats. They have sausages wrapped around their necks so they'll have something to eat or to give the people who are saved. Three of the ships of the convoy go down. They have to leave the refugees to die in the water, and her ship sails on, even though it's hit, does sail on to the United States. I think that's one of the reasons they never spoke about it. Uh, as soon as they leave, the Battle of Britain starts. Germany is looking to invade England, but they need the air control of the airs. The British Air Force fights them to a tie, and Churchill famously says, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much been owed by so many to so few." And Fritz Oppenheimer at the time, who I think has been deeply depressed about the way his life has been going, writes to his wife, "I live more intensely than ever with London part of the Blitz." And he comes to appreciate the experience of living this life. He takes a trip to a boat trip. He realizes he's not going to get his law degree in Britain, so he gets on a ship, comes to the United States. Very difficult to earn a living. And then, in December 7th, 1941, Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Adolf Hitler shockingly declares war on the United States. Question is what will happen to the Japanese and German people of that extraction living in the United States? They decide to The United States decides to intern the Japanese. They're taken to camps in California and Washington on the West Coast. But the Germans agreed no travel, no camera, no legal work. And this previously wealthy family is now living in a two-room apartment in Queens. And people forget about it because we kind of know how the story turned out. But in 1942, it had really looked like Germany and Japan had won. If you looked at a map of Europe, blue is the areas, kind of occupied by the Germans or their allies, the countries which are neutral. Spain and Portugal are fascist. Switzerland is really just neutral enough to be taking both the Jews and the Nazis' money into their banks. Sweden is providing the iron ore for the Nazis' war machine. So they have really taken all of continental Europe. Fritz Oppenheimer is desperate. He wants to get back into the army. He wants to volunteer again. He's 45 years old, blind in an eye from a World War I injury, bad shoulder. And then finally in 1943, the American Army needs soldiers, so they raise the age limit to 45. And my grandmother writes, we have a home. Our family outran the claws of the Nazis, and the children seem to be on the correct path to be good Americans. But for you, the straight and narrow path has no attraction when there's a world war and Hitler's power seems unshrinkable. Will your poor eyes, your age, or your status as an enemy alien keep you once more from going to war? Not possible. So Fritz Oppenheimer joins the American Army, and at this point, the I think when the Nazis started, they were really looking to steal the Jews' money and their possessions, but hoped that they would leave to somewhere else. By 1941, they really controlled most of continental Europe, and they decide just to murder them all. Hitler had said, and nobody really seemed to believe it, but if the international Jewish financier in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, the result will not be the Bolshevizing of the earth and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. And by the end, 6 million had been killed. So things are looking very bad. But in 1943, the tide turned. Hitler decided to take Stalingrad, partially because it had the Russian dictator's name connected to it. An army gets surrounded. Hitler demands that they stay and die, and they almost all did die. But he really lost his momentum on the Eastern Front. The Germans are marching their way through North Africa. They need more oil to keep the war machine going. Uh, the British keep retreating and retreating, but finally, at the Battle of El Alamein, they stop the Germans and start them driving back in the other direction. Fritz Oppenheimer graduates from basic training, and at the time, they were enemy aliens, and the rule in the American Army at the time was if you passed basic training, you would not only would you become an American citizen, your entire family would become American citizens. I'll point out now that soldiers fighting in the American Army do not become citizens, and in many cases do not even have a path to citizenship, even if they serve in the Army. Fritz Oppenheimer is sent to officer candidate school, graduates as a second lieutenant. Something very ironic about this because the German army would not promote Jews. They never joined the officer corps. In the American army, he became an officer. They figure out that here is a fluent German-speaking lawyer who can probably be of value to Dwight Eisenhower, who's the supreme Allied commander and planning the invasion of Europe from England. So they send him to Eisenhower's headquarters. He walks into Bushy Park, where the generals and the people who would become his comrades are very suspicious that here at Eisenhower's headquarters, where the greatest secret in the world is, where will the Allies invade? Will it be Norway? Will it be Calais? Will it be uh, Normandy? It's really, it's the key secret to the world. Here is a short, bespectacled man with a heavy German accent. They're suspicious. They send him back to London to work on the handbook for military government after, the Allies make their way into Europe. One of the papers we discovered, which was written really exactly at this time, so this is 1944, is we found something written by Martin Bormann from a conversation with Hitler, where Hitler told Bormann, he said, "We will in any case win the military war, but lose the racial war if we do not change our previously held conceptions and our consequent attitudes." So they are working on, because they have more men than women, that whatever purebred Aryan men are there should breed with as many women as possible to create the next generation of purebred, Germans. I found this, shocking, but they had this program. They were going to end, what was considered bad about illegitimacy, just so that they could keep the purebred race moving. June 6, 1944, the Allies invade Normandy. Incredible courage for those troops to get out of those Higgins landing boats, wade onto the beaches at Omaha Beach under, tremendous fire from the German outposts. Other beaches, the British, tended to walk on. But then the Allies are really constrained for 6 weeks. They're held on the Normandy beaches till they finally, break their way out, really by, you know, leveling the French towns, around them, and drive to liberate Paris and up to the border of the Reich. The concern at the time was that the Nazis would move from Berlin, which was very, flat territory, down to the mountains in the south. On the left, you can see Hitler and his mistress with the mountains of the south, and then the war will go on for years. You can see the map room from Eisenhower's headquarters. That's the map of the National Redoubt, so he was concerned about it too. Did not take Berlin, sent Patton south to make sure that they took took the mountains. There was a question about why didn't the Nazis evacuate from Berlin? A lot of crazy reasons why Hitler didn't do it, but we wondered what happened to the evacuation plan. Turns out there was an evacuation plan. Hitler's historians have been looking for it for many years. Couldn't find it because it's been sitting in Montclair, New Jersey. Here it is. It's the evacuation plan for the government to move south. Hitler never actually sent the plan into motion. But the interesting thing was, when we took this back to the topography of terror in Berlin, the historian said, "We've been looking for that." So, here it is, and soon to go into the historical record. Finally, by April 29th, 1945, the Russian army is closing in on Berlin. Bormann says, because the future of all our positions appear hopeless, here's Hitler's political test and personal testament. And Hitler writes, but before everything else, I call upon the leadership of the nation and those who follow it to observe the racial laws most carefully, and to fight mercilessly against the poisoners of all people of the world, international Jewry. Just shocking that by the end, he'd learned absolutely nothing, took no responsibility upon himself, and was still blaming the Jews. Week later, this is May 6th, I guess, the Germans go to surrender in Reims at Eisenhower's headquarters. Looks like the war in Europe is over. Joseph Stalin, however, is furious. He said, I just killed 1 million people to take Berlin. It's very important that the Germans surrender in Berlin so that they could admit that they surrendered on their own territory, and it's that the head of the army will do it. So he demands a do-over. Eisenhower says that's fine, agrees to send top generals, calls on Fritz Oppenheimer, and they quickly organize an expedition, fly to Berlin. They pick up the German generals at Stendal, make it onto Berlin, and here you can see that's Field Marshal Keitel, with the baton on the ground, at, head of the Navy von Friedeberg stepping off the plane, head of the Luftwaffe Stumpf behind him, and then Fritz Oppenheimer returning to his native Berlin 7 years after he fled over the border. Russians throw a military parade. The bands are playing. Here is, Fritz Oppenheimer walking with the German soldiers and carrying the surrender documents to be negotiated into the hall. They negotiate with the Russians until it's actually the next day. So it would be May 9th. So May 9th, it goes slightly after midnight. The Allies come in, sit down at their table on one side. They've got the papers, set to go. The Germans, walk in, Field Marshal Keitel with his, Prussian, baton, very arrogant. They sit at the table. They say, "Okay, bring me the papers to sign." Zhukov says, "We're not bringing them to you. You come to us." The German delegation walks over to the Allies table, sit down. There's no pen. They're in front of Fritz Oppenheimer. He gives them his pen. There he is showing the German Field Marshal where to sign the surrender. And World War II in Europe is over. I think that's a great reversal of fortune that there it was, Fritz Oppenheimer with his pen, in front of Keitel at the surrender in World War II. He drinks vodka with the Russians until 5 in the morning, then picks up the Germans. They get back on the plane, and here again, Field Marshal Keitel asks, "Major, how come you speak German without any accent?" And Fritz Oppenheimer wrote, "I was tempted to rub it in and tell him frankly that I was born in Berlin, had fought on his side in the Great War. Then I immigrated to the United States, volunteered as a private in the U.S. Army, went to officer candidate school, and now as a commissioned officer, I have the miraculously fine assignment to watch him sign the unconditional surrender and to guard him on his journey home. But after second thought, I believed it more in line with the intentions of General Eisenhower to camouflage the truth and to reply simply, the American schools are excellent." The Secretary of War wrote him back and said, "I wish you'd actually told him that. He would have jumped out of the plane." Now the war is over. Fritz Oppenheimer wants to go home. His wife certainly wants him to come home, but the American army does not want him to come home. 5 million ethnic Germans have been expelled from Poland and Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. The slave laborers in the German camps are looking to go home. The American troops want to go home, and they need him to stay. So he stays to work on denazification. He's also one of the few, German lawyers who was, on the staff at the time. So he's on Eisenhower's staff, accompanies him back to Berlin to a Four Power Conference. Here you can see him standing on the rubble of his former home. He's got a pistol in his hand. He's very big smile on his face, doesn't mind about his home, happy to be back with the Allies. He goes to, they're gathering evidence to try the top Nazis, goes into Gestapo headquarters on July 10th, 1945, said, I called at the offices of the modern Nero, but not like so many of his poorest victims to be tortured to death. Well armed, without knocking at any door, which is still existing, were widely open. I searched the ruins of what was formerly worse than Dante's Inferno and uncovered this hideous letter paper. How often such paper must have been used for orders by the Gestapo to liquidate human beings. The modern medieval age in Germany is over, and this is proof of the final defeat of Nazism. The task ahead is arduous, but less frightful and horrible. The next month, he goes to Hitler's bunker, which is, I'm sure, where we were able to pick up many of these documents, which now are, getting distributed into the historical record or at the National Archives. And long letter, but he writes, I managed to get a little memory of this beast of men. He stays. He's working on creating a denazified judiciary for Germany. Here he is in Stuttgart, swearing in the new German judicial system. You wonder in Nazi Germany who was the new judicial system, and he picked. He helped select. The justice minister was a former law professor. The president actually was a very close friend of his, a Christian German politician who'd stayed. So they were going to be the new Germans running their country. The top Nazis were tried at Nuremberg, and he participated in trials with the evidence that he'd gathered and consulting with them. His wife is pressuring him heavily this whole time to come home. He's been gone for 2.5 years by now. Finally, in 1946, he's earned the Bronze Star. He negotiates with the German leaders the law for the liberation from National Socialism and militarism, given the Legion of Merit by General Clay. Here you can see him earning the Legion of Merit. He joked to his wife that he's so short that General Clay could not fit in the frame, and then he goes home. Field Marshal Keitel from the interview is hanged after Nuremberg. And Fritz Oppenheimer is going home hoping to be a lawyer. The British give him his barrister license. The Germans offered him his notary license and his to be a lawyer in Germany. He turns them down. Goes back, hopes to get the State Department. I'm sorry, the New York bar to give him his law license, but they said, no, you've got to start from scratch. You've got to go back to law school. So he said, I'm close to 50. I'm not going to do that. Went to work for the State Department, worked on the Marshall Plan. Here he is at the Council of Foreign Ministers. You can see him with Secretary of State Acheson. You can always tell which one is Fritz Oppenheimer because he's so short. Then you get into he starts having heart disease in his 50s, spent a lot of time in combat, smoked while he was in the army, starts having heart attacks, forced to retire. Doctors told him, Dr. Oppenheimer, you must rest if you're going to live. He said, that's fine. I don't care that much. You see him come out of a yurt in Mongolia. There he is panning for gold in Alaska in 1967. Goes on safari in Tanzania in 1968. Falls in a pit, has heart attack number 7 or 8, and passes away in Nairobi. His ashes are spread over the Serengeti. So we really found we think is a great story. And what we learned while we were working on this story, Fritz Oppenheimer, to me, it was a really rare reversal of fortune story. He was a towering personality in a 5'3" frame. I was amazed that he always had to be an outsider, but he seemed to fight through it. He was a Jew in the German army. He was a German in the U.S. Army, and then a U.S. Officer in occupied Germany when the Nazis had said, if we lose the war, we'll be ruled by the Jews. So he was always on the outside, but he really had a deep desire to be at the center of world events, and he was. Of course, there was a cost to his family, but um, he did end up at world events. You do think today, are there lessons for today? And sadly, I think there are. You see that democracy is constantly under threat. I get the feeling that authoritarianism, which was fairly well discredited as a successful form of government, is really on the rise again. Russia, China, some in the United States are working on it as well too. Everybody talks about the rule of law, but you have to have a rule of law which has just can't be a weapon. It needs to dispense equal justice, and it's good to have a plan B. So I will say that very fortunately, the Nazis, since they took away my mother's citizenship, they gave it back to the family. So going down through my line, me and my children, we have European citizenship through Germany. So I thank you for letting us share the story with you, and I would like to entertain any questions that you might have.